it was the first time I'd ever been anywhere where the local people unthinkingly just addressed me in the local dialect. They started speaking Piemontese to me because I looked like I was one of them.
Planet Guitar has the great pleasure today to chat with musician and recording engineer Steve Albini. Welcome, Steve.
Hello, thanks for having me.
How's Chicago these days?
Great. We just elected a new mayor, the first unabashedly politically progressive mayor in the city's history, and I'm extremely excited to see how he handles the rest of the recalcitrant city council. And yeah, I'm very much looking forward to seeing what happens.
You've lived there for many years. What do you love about the city?
Well, there are a lot of practical things that are great about Chicago. It's central to the continent, so you can, getting from here to anywhere is pretty easy. There's a really world-class international airport, so travel internationally is easy. There's a train hub here, so getting to small towns downstate and in the Midwest is fairly straightforward. It has every kind of industry, like manufacturing, fabricating. So if you in the business I'm in, running a recording studio, you occasionally need heavy lifting of things, like you need welded parts, or you need machining done, or you need industrial fabrication of one kind or another, and this is the place to do it. So for my purposes, for being a guy in a rock band who tours occasionally, for being a recording engineer who has to receive clients from all over the world, from running a business that occasionally requires technical interaction with the rest of the industry, it's the perfect spot. And also, like, culturally, it's great. Like, the music scene here is unbeaten worldwide. Just like the most eclectic and interesting crew of people. Yeah, I really can't imagine loving a city more than I love Chicago.
That's lovely. But I understand that a part of your family are from the Piedmont region of northern Italy.
Yeah, my family is Piemontese, like from the Po River Valley and near Torino, Milano. My father's side of the family, his grandmother and his father emigrated to the US with no English. Like, they couldn't speak English. They didn't have any formal education. They just made their way by their wits. And my mother's side of the family emigrated slightly earlier, and they were in Northern California growing olives and making olive oil for a generation before my mother was born.
I see. Do you continue to have a relationship with your family town?
Not really, no. I don't know anything about my distant family in Italy, and I don't have any relationship with them. I do remember one time I was in Torino, and we went into a kind of a trattoria, like a little place, just like a family-owned restaurant. And in the bar, it was a bunch of rockers of my age, and it was the first time I'd ever been anywhere where the local people unthinkingly just addressed me in the local dialect. They started speaking Piemontese to me because I looked like I was one of them, and that had never happened to me anywhere on earth before. There are certain characteristics that I have that Piemontese people have. Like, I have extremely long, gangly limbs. Like, I have truly ape-like limbs, and I have blue eyes but black hair, and those things are not common apparently elsewhere in Italy.
I see. And do you speak any Italian?
Only enough to get through a sound check. Suona la gran cassa, suona la rullante.
Did you grow up in a musical family?
Not strictly musical. My mother played organ at the church, and my father played guitar and played folk songs on guitar. He courted my mother by singing, novelty songs and folk songs to her on an acoustic guitar, but neither one of them ever performed publicly in any way. And we didn't have musical training at home, like we didn't have family sing-alongs or anything like that.
But you play many instruments. Which was your first?
I didn't play any instruments. When I was in school, I learned the clarinet, had a few years of band class and played the clarinet. That didn't really matter. But when I was a teenager, I discovered punk rock and I wanted to be in a band. And I figured the fastest route to being in a band was learning an instrument. And the simplest looking instrument was the bass guitar. So I picked, the bass guitar was my first instrument. It only had 4 strings. It seemed like you were only going to be playing one note at a time. How tough could it be, honestly?
What was it?
It was a PVT-40 bass from the local family music center in Missoula, Montana.
Have you still got it?
I don't have that exact one. That precise one got smashed on stage. I was in a band called Big Black, and when we played our final concert, we smashed all of our equipment. And our bass player didn't own a bass guitar, so he was using mine. And we smashed everything up at the end of that last show, and he smashed up my PVT-40. But I have since acquired several other PVT-40 basses. I think they're a unique instrument. They're kind of unwieldy, and they're big and heavy, and they have unnecessarily complicated switching and electronics, but they're extremely burly and durable and reliable, like everything the PV company makes. They're just, bulletproof, reliable gear for working musicians.
Now you're associated with the Travis Bean and the company Series 1 guitars. Are those still your go-to instruments?
Yeah, I have a Travis Bean Model 500, and that guitar has been with me since I started the band Shellac in 1992 or whenever that was, 1991, whenever we want to put the start date for that band. I've basically only played that one guitar. The electrical guitar company, run by a guy named Kevin Burkett, did a kind of a Madame Tussauds wax museum version of my guitar, where he copied all of the physical specifications of my guitar and made a duplicate for me using very precise modern machining methods. And so I have a duplicate of that guitar, which when if I take one off and put the other one on, I genuinely can't feel a difference between them other than the wear and the age. So I carry that. I travel with that when we're on tour as a spare guitar. But for every record I've done for 30 years, every recording, every show has been this one Travis Bean Model 500. It's been modified to the extent it's been made more durable. Like there's at a show in Detroit one time, I was twatting the amp against my the headstock against my amplifier like an idiot, and I broke the neck out of the back of the guitar, like just broke the whole middle of the guitar out. And luckily it was the end of the show, so it didn't really matter. And I also knocked the amplifier over, which was kind of more consternation at the time because we had just gotten them retubed. But so that when that guitar was reassembled, Terry Straker, who's was a luthier at a guitar shop called Guitar Works in Evanston, which is a suburb of Chicago, he made a little aluminum plate out of 10-point aluminum, that just a rectangular plate that covered the vulnerable part of the guitar to sort of screw the halves together and buttress that. And that plate was later incorporated as a standard feature in the electrical guitar company guitars that were modeled after the Travis Bean guitars. It's really a nominal additional weight, but it makes an enormous difference in terms of the fragility and stability of the instrument. Like my friend Rose Marshak had a bass guitar, Model 500 bass guitar, or the Model 4000, I think it's called, bass guitar that broke in half in the same fashion, like the bottom half of it just fell off. And that was repaired. And if it had had that Straker plate, as it's come to be known, that wouldn't have happened.
Great story, thank you. To go back to your early years, you were influenced by pioneering bands like the Ramones, Pere Ubu, the Sex Pistols, and the Fall. Is it fair to say that punk has been both a musical inspiration for you and a guide for your whole life?
Yeah, it's very fair to say that. Like a lot of my business ethics are derived from the behavior that was expected of and that was sort of pioneered by the first generation of punk bands. Very self-sufficient, do-it-yourself mentality, doing things informally to the extent possible, that is not codifying things in contracts and formal agreements, doing everything on a first name handshake basis, giving people the leeway to make decisions about the things that they're responsible for, not holding people to a preordained standard of behavior. A lot of my operational characteristics as a business owner can be traced directly back to being in a self-sufficient, independent underground punk band. And I feel like that mentality, like that, the way I saw people operating in that sphere shaped my whole worldview. And I started to see that a lot of the conventions of business and society and social interaction were these clumsy remnants of a stuffier age where there was a lot of pretense and deference to class sort of baked into the notions of propriety that were around at the time, and they didn't warrant our respect. Like, genuinely, you can get by not doing things that way, and it doesn't encumber you at all. Like, you can treat everybody like a regular person, and it doesn't make you any weaker or any more vulnerable as a business person. And that was a principal fear of a lot of people, was that if you didn't protect yourself with contracts and punitive things like that, then somehow you were going to be taken advantage of, and that was going to be the end of your business. And I mean, my bands and my studio have been incredibly long-lived relative to others, my peers in the same situation. And we and the people that we consider peers are evidence that that's simply not true. You can behave honorably and decently to everybody and give everybody plenty of rope and a fair shake, and it doesn't hinder you at all. It doesn't make you weaker or more vulnerable. If anything, it makes those relationships that are forged through those behaviors, it makes those relationships more durable. The band I'm in, Shellac, has been with our record label, Touch and Go, for our entire existence. And prior to that, I was in a couple of bands, and those bands were also with Touch and Go. So I've been dealing with the same guy for putting out the records I'm on, since the mid 80s. And I call the same phone number, the same guy answers, we have the same conversations. Nothing has changed. Genuinely, nothing has changed. And I just don't see the rationale or for these sort of defensive behaviors of insulating yourself with lawyers and managers and publicists and people like that. I just feel like you can just do everything yourself between people like a normal person, and it works out fine. Like when you contacted me about doing this interview, you didn't have to fight your way through layers of management or a publicist, or
No.
you didn't need to submit samples and be cleared or get vetted or anything. It's literally, you find my phone number anywhere and call me, or find my email address anywhere and send me an email, and we'll have the conversation. I just feel like that very matter of fact, very straightforward way of doing things is just by far the simplest option for everything in my life.
You're well known for your strong moral stance about refusing royalties. Does it matter to you if others follow your lead?
No, I'm not an evangelist. I behave this way because it makes me comfortable. And I feel intuitively that I am being fair to the people that I work with. And that's enough for me. That's enough for me to keep doing it that way. Like, when I see the machinations of the greater music business, and I see people siphoning money out of other people's careers for the sake of A&R or management or whatever, I see those as parasitic relationships, and I see a lot of those people doing that in a way that is uniquely damaging to the efficiency of the core project being the band that's trying to operate and make a living and make their way through the world, and that the rest of this stuff that's attached to it is damaging and dangerous and lowers its efficiency. I can see that, and I don't choose to behave that way. But I understand there are some people who simply don't want to have to take as many phone calls as I take, or people who don't want to have to think about things like, what night of the week should we be playing in Dubuque? Like I can understand why some people want to offload that kind of stressful decision making onto functionaries, and then pay those functionaries for the privilege of not having to think about that. I can understand that mentality. I don't subscribe to it, but I understand it. And by the same token, I understand why people would try to maximize their income. Like, this record is, okay, I'm working on this record right now, and this record could be huge. And if it's huge, I want to make a lot of money because I worked on a huge record. I understand that thinking. I don't agree with it, and it's not for me, but I can't say I necessarily think of people who operate that way as villains. I think of it's just a difference in perspective. And I'm comfortable doing things the way I do. And if they can look at themselves in the mirror knowing that that's how they make a living, then they're comfortable with it as well. So, I'm never going to change the way the rest of the music business operates. But by that same token, I don't have to do things the way other people do them, as long as I can keep paying my bills.
You once said, I like big ass vicious noise that makes my head spin. But you've worked with bands who might initially seem well out of that field, like mono and classical musicians. What unites these diverse choices for you?
Well, I think you've struck on something that I think is a weakness of a lot of people in my position. A lot of people in my position, that is recording engineers or producers or whatever, they strive to, or they aspire to work on music that suits them, that music that is that they like. And I've simply abdicated that, or become completely agnostic to that as a criterion. It doesn't matter to me what kind of music my clients make. It genuinely doesn't matter. I understand that if your relationship with your clients is such that you want to be a champion for them, that you want to like participate in that band almost as a member, then it would matter a lot what kind of music they make, and you would only be working on those records that sort of engaged you in that way. I think of myself in a much more utilitarian way. Like, my services are available pretty much to anybody, and I'm going to try to do the very best I can for anybody. And in that role, I don't want my clients to ever have to wonder about whether or not I like their music. I think that's just an unreasonable kind of fear to induce in those people. I think they should feel confident that whatever kind of music they're doing, I'm going to do my very best to present it in a flattering light. And so it's not important to me that I like the music that I work on. I try very hard not to even form opinions about the music that I work on. Like, if it starts occurring to me that, this is music that I could really get into as a fan, I have to be very careful not to let that kind of fan enthusiasm color my behavior in the studio so I don't overlook some more mundane aspect of the session that requires my attention because I'm kind of getting lost in the music. I think it's important for someone in my position who's working on all kinds of music to be emotionally detached from the music that I'm working on. I think it's important that I be just as capable and just as enthusiastic and just as careful with music that I would never listen to for entertainment as for working on one of my favorite bands, on a record by one of my favorite bands. I have to have the same standard of professionalism and attention to detail for everyone. And
Well,
I feel like it's slightly unprofessional to be in the situation where you're only working on records that you like, because then if there's a stylistic change brewing inside that band, or if there is an aesthetic choice that you disagree with, you feel some kind of ownership of it, or you feel some kind of reluctance to pursue something that might change music that you like into music that you don't like. You know, I think it's dangerous to think that way, and I don't want my clients to ever wonder if I'm on their side or not.
Well, this is a fascinating issue for people who are not involved in your work, and I'm thinking particularly about Nirvana when they came to you, and you didn't particularly like Nevermind, and you weren't a big fan of theirs, and I've read a lot about it, but I'm still curious about that moment when you said, "Yes, I want to do this."
Well, I mean, there are a number of things at play there. Number one, I'm not in a position to turn down work. Like, I make a living as a recording engineer, and so within some, extraordinary limits, if someone wants me to work on their record, I'm going to work on their record, right? The matter with Nirvana was such that they were just such a huge band. They were the biggest band in the world, and it would be impossible for me to get involved in something like that without being conscious of the meta implications of working on a record with the biggest band in the world. So I tried to be cognizant of all of those and clear the air with the band about what potential problems could arise, what things I would do defensively to make sure that we didn't have problems within the session. And more importantly, Nirvana had become the biggest band in the world by way of being a completely conventional underground punk rock band, right? They played all of the same venues that my bands played. Their friends were all of the same people that I was friends with. They had all of the same formative experiences in the underground music scene that I had had. So we could communicate very clearly, very comfortably, because we had such a common experience. And their reference points, that is the music that they admired, the bands that they wanted to emulate, and the music that they liked and patterned themselves after, was all familiar to me because we were generationally congruent, right? So I was a natural person to work on one of their records. They could bring up a reference to something on a Killdozer record or on a Necros record, and I would know what they were talking about because we had these common experiences. And I think that matters a lot. I think being able to communicate with the people that you're working with because you have a shared experience and knowledge base, that makes a big difference. But you're correct that I wasn't particularly a fan of the band prior to that. I had heard them, but they didn't seem remarkable to me. And in the process of making that record, seeing them up close, seeing the way that they interacted with each other, seeing the way that their music was structured, listening to Kurt, I think he was a generational talent. He's uniquely able to evoke an emotional state with his voice, and he was an interesting and complex thinker. Like, so working with them closely and listening, being in a position of having to take their music seriously gave me a new appreciation for it. And by the end of it, I became a fan of the band, and I admire and respect them. And I think that they were a great band.
You always try to capture the raw and authentic sound of a band. I'm wondering what you felt about Joy Division, who, when they heard their albums afterwards, were surprised about the sound because it didn't sound anything like their live act. Do you think that the producer overstepped the mark?
Well, I'm not going to get in. I'm not going to second guess one of the greatest bands ever. And it seemed like their relationship with Martin Hannett was more of the style that I described, where Martin Hannett was sort of taking control of the sound and acting as a band member. And in some cases acting as though he was superior to the band members. That's not the way I would approach things, but I love those records, and I'm not going to argue that they made a mistake doing it that way. I do think that if you listen to the early Joy Division stuff, the Warsaw punk stuff and the very early Joy Division stuff, the band had a much more strident personality, and the controlled, cold, clinical presentation of the albums that they did with Martin Hannett is obviously a function of Martin Hannett's aesthetic. But I think for whatever reason, it didn't nullify the band's personality. If given my preferences, I do prefer the live recordings of the band from the same period, like the stuff that was on their official live records and on the bootlegs. Hearing the band play live on stage, it's obvious, what a fantastic band they were just, playing their instruments live as a band. So I do have a preference as a fan for the sound of the band organically, but I'm not going to argue with those records because those records are amazing.
Thank you. Shellac released live in Tokyo. You have a couple, at least, of pachinko tape machines, I believe, in your studio. You love mono. Can I ask about your roots in Japanese culture? What attracted you to that?
I don't have any specific affection for Japan. There was a brief period in the 80s where I was just getting exposed to Japanese comics and manga and things like that. And there were certain little cultural snippets of Japanese culture, especially as it tied to the visual culture of manga, that appealed to me. There were some post-war cartoon characters like Astro Boy, whose name in Japan is Atom, and that I had affection for them from my childhood. Speed Racer and Racer X were two characters on the cartoon show Speed Racer, and that was a Japanese cartoon show that was translated into English and broadcast in America. And I had affection for those from my childhood, but I don't have particularly strong attachment to Japan. I love being there when I am there. I've been there maybe 3 or 4 times lifetime, and I have always enjoyed myself. I've always been fascinated by it. The sort of swarm-like behavior of the Japanese people is kind of incredible to me. How there can be so many people in such a confined space, and they don't, they don't have a problem with that. Like the sort of social conventions there are so strong that things that would be a problem in other places are not a problem there, like matters of overcrowding and shared use of facilities and stuff. But there is an awful lot about Japan that Westerners just will never fully understand. Because we don't live with that culture, I think it's rude to fetishize it, and I feel like I was in danger of doing that, but I have pulled short of that just by getting to know Japanese people and by a little more exposure to the Japanese culture and Japanese art, I can appreciate it as distinct and unique without trying to make it into a little fetish for myself.
As we all know, it's very difficult to maintain good relationships over many years. I'm interested in the relationship that you have with Bob Weston. You seem to have a very successful relationship over many years.
Yeah, I mean, I met Bob when he was in the Volcano Suns, and I recorded an album with them, and we maintained our contact ever since. He and I are both nerds, and we're into nerdy, dorky stuff, and he pursued electronics academically and got an electrical engineering degree. I never pursued it academically. I just was a hobbyist. And so like he's been a part of my life for a very long time, and I love and admire him. The same is true with Todd Trainer, the drummer in Shellac. Like, I met Todd when he was a teenager in Minneapolis, and he had just joined the band Rifle Sport, who were friends of mine. And he and I hit it off on a personal level, and we've been bosom buddies ever since.
Steve, you have so many interests: photography, journalism, painting, playing in bands, setting up your own recording studio, cooking, playing poker, charitable work. Are there any others that might surprise people listening?
I do a little bit of hand tools woodworking.
Do you?
Yeah, I like to make useful items for the house out of wood. There's something very extremely satisfying about using hand tools on wood to fashion something that's useful. It's just such a fundamental part of culture that, like, when you make a table or a stool or something for some shelving unit or something, and then it becomes part of your household and it's just a normal part of your furniture, there's something extremely gratifying about that. And along that's all of the other things that you mentioned are interests of mine and things that I have pursued somewhat seriously at one point or another. But it's never been on my mind that I could make a living at any of them. They've always just been pursuits of mine that I wanted to get better at, and that they provide me a lot of joy.
Do you have any other passions that you're thinking about pursuing?
My plate is pretty full at the moment.
I guess. To close,
I'm aware of the fact that I'm now quite old, and when you're old, it's difficult to learn new things. You can develop more acuity and more facility with the things that you're already involved in, and you can get deeper and deeper into things. And that's where that's the way I look at all of my interests now. Is I'm just trying to get better at it. I'm trying to do it at a higher level. I don't really need a new thing to occupy my time.
To close, what are the music projects you're involved in now, and do you have anything in the pipeline?
Well, Shellac has had an album finished for well over a year. Like, it's coming up on a year and a half now. That's just been grinding its way through the manufacturing process. There was a huge backlog in the pressing plants here. In the post-COVID era, there were a lot of records that sort of came out all at once, and so the pressing plants just got overwhelmed. There's been some increased capacity recently, and there are some new processes that are being used to press records, which have a lot of promise in terms of quality and in terms of sustainability, that is, being ecologically better than PVC records. And we're pursuing that for Shellac's upcoming release. Like I said, we have an album that has been finished and in the can, as they say, for more than a year. And we're trying to get that released before it becomes an archaic piece. I don't have any other musical projects. I just have the band Shellac. That's it, and that's plenty for me.
When might we see that album in record stores?
Oh, good Lord, what a question. Yeah, I have no idea. We have all of the artwork together. We are now just finalizing a few small manufacturing details. And once that's done, we will be then at the whim of the pressing plant and at the mercy of the supply chain. So,
Steve, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.
thanks for having me.
Cheerio.
See you.